Secretary General, what does an election victory for Donald Trump's election victory, what does that mean for NATO, given that he explicitly set conditions for defending allies, basically saying those who don't pay up will not be defended? Thank you.
NATO's security guarantee is a treaty commitment, and all allies have made a solemn commitment to defend each other. And this is something which is absolute and it's unconditioned. The NATO security guarantees are important for Europe, but they are also important for the United States. So a strong NATO is important for Europe, but it's also important for the United States. And we have to remember that the only time that we have invoked Article 5, our collective defense clause, is after an attack on the United States, after 9/11. And thousands of NATO soldiers, also from Europe, Canada, and also partner nations, have been deployed and have contributed to the efforts of the whole alliance to fight terrorism in Afghanistan, and NATO continues to provide support not only for the efforts of our mission in Afghanistan, but also provide support to the US-led coalition fighting ISIL. We have just decided to provide, for instance, AWACS surveillance planes as a direct support to the coalition fighting ISIL, and we train Iraqi officers. That just underlines that NATO is important both for collective defense in Europe, but also to provide help and play a key role in the fight against international terrorism. And therefore, I'm looking forward to work with President-elect Trump, and I look forward to welcoming him to Brussels at our next summit next year, and also to meet him soon to discuss the way forward and how we can strengthen the transatlantic bond in challenging times with a new and more challenging security environment.
Trump has articulated a different sort of approach to Russia. Do you expect NATO to change its tone or make any adjustments to the enhanced forward presence as the Trump administration takes effect? And to follow up on your last response, Mr. Trump has talked about a larger counterterrorism role for NATO, which seems to suggest not just the kinds of training that's been done in Afghanistan or in Jordan, but an actual bigger role in European counterterrorism. This is not something that's necessarily popular with other allies. Is there room for NATO to do more than what it's doing now to fight terrorism?
NATO has already decided to step up its efforts to provide support to the coalition fighting ISIL. And we decided to maintain our presence in Afghanistan, which is our biggest military operation, and we are in Afghanistan to fight terrorism, to prevent Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for international terrorists. Then, of course, we will always assess how we can do more, both to stabilize our neighborhood, to fight terrorism, but also, of course, provide the necessary collective defense in Europe, making sure that we provide the necessary deterrence. And that's the reason why I'm looking forward to meet President-elect Trump, to sit down with him and to discuss the way forward, and also to welcoming President-elect Trump to our next summit here in Brussels. Because that provides the platform, that provides the opportunities to sit down with a new US President and discuss how we can all live up to what is our treaty commitment to provide collective defense based on the idea of all for one, one for all. And to be able to do that, we have to respond and to adapt to a more demanding security environment including hybrid threats, terrorist threats, cyber attacks, and many other kinds of threats and challenges. So this is something we are working on in NATO. We have made important decisions. We are implementing decisions. And I congratulate Donald Trump on his election as president, and I'm looking forward to work with him on all these important issues and to discuss the way forward when we meet.
Secretary General, how soon do you expect to speak with Mr. Trump, and what do you hope to hear from him?
So I, first of all, would like to meet him as soon as possible, and I welcome him to the NATO summit in Brussels next year. But I will also, of course, reach out and look into the possibilities of having a conversation on phone as soon as possible. But as you understand, nothing has yet been decided, and therefore that is something the staffs of my secretariat here in NATO, but also the transition team of President-elect Donald Trump has to look into.
Does this election result force some kind of a new rethink about the way in which the security and defense is arranged in Europe? Is it too soon to say anything about that? Because there's a pretty lively conversation going on in any event about the EU-NATO cooperation, etc.
The US commitment to NATO and the US commitment to the collective defense of Europe has been rock solid for almost 70 years. And I am absolutely confident that that will still be the case, and that the US will be committed to the defense of Europe and to the NATO obligations and our security guarantees. And I am confident because a strong NATO is important for Europe, but it's also of great importance for the United States. 2 world wars have taught us that stability in Europe is also important for the United States. And we have to remember that the only time NATO has invoked our collective defense clause, Article 5, was after an attack on the United States, 9/11. And thousands of European soldiers, also from Finland, partner countries of NATO, has participated in NATO's presence in Afghanistan as a direct response on the United States. So I really believe that the strength of NATO is so important for the United States and Europe, so we will continue to respond together to a more challenging security environment.
Gentlemen, are you concerned that President Trump will find a new kind of relationship with Russia, with Vladimir Putin, and where does that leave Europe vis-à-vis questions like the Ukrainian crisis? Thank you.
I think we have to remember that the decision made by heads of state and government at the Warsaw Summit was a decision about enhanced NATO presence in the eastern part of our alliance, and I'm absolutely confident that NATO will implement those decisions. We are in the process of doing that now. So more deterrence, more defense, but combined with a message of the need to continue dialogue with Russia and to keep channels for political contact with Russia open. So for NATO, there is no contradiction between political dialogue with Russia and strong deterrence and defense. Actually, we believe that the strong defense, strong deterrence, is the foundation for dialogue, political engagement with Russia. And we are totally dependent on a strong defense industry, a strong European defense industry, a strong North American defense industry. And this industry has provided NATO with the best equipment and the most modern capabilities over decades. But we have to make sure that that's also the case in the future. At the same time, of course, what NATO does is important for the industry because NATO plays a key role in deciding how much we spend on defense, on what we spend and how we spend. And all of this is, of course, of great importance for the industry. And therefore, I welcome the fact that NATO made the decision in September 2014 to increase defense spending. And now we are delivering. Defense spending is going up in Europe. 2014 was the first year in many years where we saw increased defense spending across Europe and in Canada. This matters. If all those NATO allies that spend less than 2% of GDP on defense invested 2% of GDP in defense, that would account for $100 billion US, which is roughly the same amount as the total defense spending of UK and France combined. Then, of course, NATO is important when it comes to on what we invest and on what we spend. NATO defense planning process, but also our efforts to spend 20% of total defense budgets on investments is key. And then NATO plays a role as a platform to create multinational cooperation to make sure that NATO allies work more closely together. We have some common funded projects, the AWACS of course, but also the successor after AWACS, Alliance Ground Surveillance and other common projects.
And our congratulations to the new President of the United States of America. And we will organize together with the NATO maybe a first visit in Brussels next year for a combined visit to the NATO, but also in the NATO to the new headquarters of NATO. It was decided during the last summit to organize a specific summit in Brussels next year with the new President of the US. The second element that I want to say that, of course, we need to discuss more and more with the industry, and I'm very pleased to see that it was possible to organize that with the defense industry from the US, but we try to do the same in Europe. And in the near future, it will be our task to invest more in defense. We have said that during many meetings in the NATO. I'm sure that it's a real duty for the European member states of the NATO to do more in comparison with the situation now with the US is leading the expenditure process in the NATO and in general terms in defense. The expenditure process in the NATO and in general terms in defense. But if we need to do that, first we need to do that in Belgium, and I'm very pleased to confirm that we have decided to invest 9 billion euros to have a modernization of our Air Force, but also the Navy in Belgium, and we try to do that in a good collaboration with some partners. I'm thinking about the Navy in collaboration with the Netherlands, and I'm sure that we need to have more and more collaborations among the different European member states of the NATO. We will continue to push pressure to have a better collaboration, and it's the same situation now with the European Union. I know that with Federica Mogherini there are very good relations and we have had a lot of meetings, but it's important to see a good collaboration between NATO and the European Union. And I want just to conclude saying that in the context with the industry, I'm sure on one thing, if it's possible one day to have maybe a European defense, but before that, a real European pillar inside the NATO, it will be just possible if we have also an evolution to a European defense industry. Without a real evolution to a European defense industry, so with real collaboration and maybe with some champions in industry, like we have had in the civil aviation with Airbus, without such an evolution to a real European military industry and defense industry, it will be very difficult to enhance the capacity to organize not only collaboration, but a real European pillar in the NATO in collaboration with the US. So we will work on that, and I'm very pleased to see that it was a very intensive day about that, to explain the situation between the NATO and the industry, but I'm sure that the next step will be to have such a same organization with a more close cooperation between the different industries in Europe about defense. Thank you.
And just what we discussed today, we discussed innovation mainly, among other things. And innovation, we recognize that it's not only a technology aspect. The innovation comes with the way we can have game changers in our operational concept that could change the way we conduct warfare, and what are the technological aspects of this concept, and even what would be the consequences on the education process for our people. And we have huge discussion in this area, recognizing that this is our role to explain the future concept and how we see these game changers in the future of warfare. And this is a two-way approach, so the industry can give us their perspective and how they can bring technological innovation to support this concept. And this is why we need to have a huge partnership, especially with 1M, which is for our alliance to keep the edge against any kind of adversary in the future. So basically, this is what we did today. We had very lively, candid discussions with all these companies, and I think that we will have a lot of outcomes from this forum.
Thank you. We have literally just a few minutes for questions. We'll start with Reuters. I think you just...
We are monitoring the deployment of the Russian aircraft group Kuznetsov, and we do that, of course, as we always do, in a responsible way. This is something we have done many times before, and Russia has, of course, the right to operate in international waters. The unusual thing this time is that Russia has deployed the aircraft carrier group to the Eastern Mediterranean to be a part of a combat operation against targets in Syria. And that is, of course, something which is of great concern, because we have seen that there has been a significant Russian buildup in Syria. And they have conducted many airstrikes, indiscriminate airstrikes. Also, many civilians have been killed. So anything that can add to that capacity is, of course, a reason for concern. But we monitor in a normal way deployment of Russian ships, carrier group, and we do that in a responsible way.
For your question is, in Warsaw it was decided to have an enhanced presence in the East and to look at how NATO can enhance its projection of stability. And there were a lot of measures decided in Warsaw. But behind these measures there is something which is very important, is to look at the NATO defense planning process and the procurement of the necessary capability to meet all challenges and to sustain that in the long term. And NATO has probably focused in the past too much on expeditionary operation, and we are renewing now with more high-end capabilities, especially those capabilities that are necessary to counter anti-access area denial systems, which requires a higher level of integration of our own capabilities. And what is at stake, and we discussed that today, is the interoperability of all these systems if we want to have a higher level of integration, which is the key of success against this kind of systems.